Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
How are you today?
We're wonderful.
Our message for this morning is titled Jesus, the 2020 Vision of God. So here we are living in the year 2020, and this is our first message for 2020. So we are titling it, I'm giving it the title, Jesus, the 2020 Vision of God. What does that mean? That to get a 2020 vision of God, there's no one else that can give us that 2020 vision of God except for the person of Jesus Christ. And Jesus made a very interesting statement in Matthew 5:8.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
Now think of this. Jesus in the Beatitudes in verse 8 clearly tells us and states, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So what does that mean? That blessed are the pure in heart, that they shall see God. Who in the world is pure enough to be able to see God? Nobody. So what is Jesus trying to say here? Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. The pure in heart can only have that kind of a purity and know God, for they shall know God, except through Jesus Christ's revelation of God. That's what that means. That if we want to, none of us can see God face to face. Nobody, I'm going to give you the verse. Nobody ever saw God face to face. So here, when Jesus is making this statement, blessed are the pure in heart, they shall see God, that pure in heart means that they have got an understanding of God from no one else but the person of Jesus Christ. And when they've had that understanding of God from no one else but the person of Jesus Christ, they have that pure of heart, and they shall know God. With that, let's look at what Jesus himself stated as far as what it means to have a pure heart. In John chapter 13, 11, we're going to look at a few verses here now. John chapter 13, verse 11.
For he knew who would betray him. Therefore he said, you are not all clean.
See, so what he's stating there of Judas, that Judas did not have a pure heart, that he was not clean. It's the same Greek word for the word pure and clean. The next verse we want to look at is Acts chapter 18, verses 1 to 6. Acts chapter 18, verses 1 to 6. Acts chapter 18, verses 1 to 6.
After these things, Paul departed from Athens and went to Corinth. And he found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to depart from Rome. And he came to them. So, because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for by occupation they were tent makers. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded both Jews and Greeks. When Silas and Timothy had come from Macedonia, Paul was compelled by the Spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus is the Christ. But when they opposed him and blasphemed, he shook his garments and said to them, your blood be upon your own heads. I am clean. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles.
So here again, when he said, I am clean, he's clearly telling us that what he said, that Paul was compelled by the Spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus is the Christ. And he gave them this message. Why? Because he had that message. If he didn't have that message, he couldn't have given it. The other one now we're going to look at is 1 Timothy 1:5. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5.
Now, the purpose of the commandment is love from a pure heart, from a good conscience, and from sincere faith.
So we cannot have a pure heart unless we have got it from the person of Jesus Christ. Again, in chapter 3 of 1 Timothy, verses 8 to 10.
Likewise, deacons must be reverent, not double-tongued, not given to much wine, not greedy for money, holding the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience.
Okay, here in verse 8, it tells us, likewise, deacons must be reverent, not double-tongued. If you are double-tongued, then you are not pure. And we're going to see how important that is. And then it says in verse 9, holding the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience. Go ahead.
Verse 10, but let these also be first be tested, then let them serve as deacons, being found blameless.
So here we are clearly shown how important it is to have this pure conscience, and we cannot have it outside of the person of Jesus Christ. Titus chapter 1, verses 10 to verse 16. Titus chapter 1, verses 10 to 16.
For there are many insubordinate, both idle talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision, whose mouth must be stopped, who pervert whole households, teaching things which they ought not, for the sake of dishonest gain. One of them, a prophet of their own, said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. This testimony is true. Therefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men who turn from the truth. To the pure all things are pure, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving nothing is pure. But even their mind and conscience are defiled.
So in verse 15, what Paul is stating is saying to the pure, all things are pure. So when we have this purity of mind and have known God the way He should be known, then to us everything will be what? Pure. We will look at everything through the eyes of no one else but the way God looks at people. To the pure, all things are pure, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. So if we have any kind of a defilement in us, and that defilement will come outside not knowing God the way He should be known, so that any kind of a defilement, it will not give us that pure understanding of God. So again, I'll read the verse. To the pure, all things are pure, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure, but even their minds and conscience are defiled. The next verse we look at is James chapter 1 and verse 17. James chapter 1 and verse 17.
Every good gift and perfect gift is from above, and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning.
And the other verse I want us to look at now is verse 27. Same chapter.
Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world.
Okay, so now that last portion where James is stating that we are to keep ourselves unspotted from the world. To be pure, we must be unspotted from the world. And we are going to look at what that means. What does it mean that we must be unspotted from the world? Now, to look at what Jesus was stating, that blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Let's look at John chapter 1, verses 17 and 18. John chapter 1, verses 17 and 18.
For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God at any time. the only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared
So
him.
what John has stated here, again, for the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Then John states, for the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. I'm sorry, the next portion. No one, okay? So grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. The law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Then he states, no one has seen God at any time. How is that possible? Why is he stating that? No one has seen God at any time, and we will see why, because he states, no one has seen God at any time, the only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him. The only person, nobody, has seen God the way God should be seen. There were people in the Old Testament that saw God. So what John is stating is exactly what Jesus said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. What is that pure in heart? The pure in heart will be that the only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him. So for us to see God, we can only see him through who? The only begotten Son, who was in the bosom of the Father. Without Jesus Christ, dear ones, nobody in this world can see God. What that means, nobody in this world can come to know God the way he should be known. That's how important Jesus Christ is. And we look at verses where Jesus is going to address this. Now, when Adam and Eve, did Adam and Eve see God? Of course they did. Adam and Eve saw God. Adam and Eve talked to God on a one-to-one basis. Before they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, when Jesus said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, did Adam and Eve have a pure heart? Of course they did, because they had not sinned. And we're going to see how Adam and Eve no longer had this pure heart. So they had pure heart before they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they saw God, which means to say they knew God's character the way God's character should have been known. But when Adam and Eve ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, keep this in mind, Jesus said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. When Adam and Eve ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, were they still pure in heart to see God? But they were seeing God. God spoke to them on a one-to-one basis after they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But they had lost what they had before. So now they could not see God. How? With that pure heart. They didn't have that pure heart now. So they were looking at God the way the devil wanted them to look at God. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. They did not have that. No longer, even though they were looking at God face to face, but they were looking at God the way the devil wanted them to look at God. That's how important this statement of Jesus is. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So as long as we are eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and not eating from the tree of life, we are being fed by no one else but the enemy. The enemy is giving us a view of God that is not from the person of Jesus Christ. That's why it is so important. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And only one that can give us that is Jesus. Adam and Eve left the garden with that mind. And tragically, the whole human race in Adam ended up with that view in God. And Jesus came and reversed that understanding of God. All those whose hearts have been made pure by none other than Jesus Christ shall see God's character of agape love. And for that, I want us to look at Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6 and verses 22 and 23. Matthew chapter 6, verses 22 and 23.
The light of the body is the eye.
And we're going to read from the King James Version on this.
The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness?
So what is Jesus saying here? Think of it. What Jesus is saying, the light of the body is the eye. What eye? What eye is Jesus talking of? He's not talking of the physical eye. He's talking of what? The mind. The understanding that this mind gets from no one else but the person of Jesus Christ. So he clearly says the light of the body is the eye. If the mind, Adam and Eve, before they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they had the right mind, the right eye, that single eye, looking at God with the right mind. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore the eye be single, if the eye be single, if your mind is what? Not contaminated or polluted, has become impure from eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you have a single mind. That's what it is. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye, thy mind be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. Imagine Jesus stating that, which means to say, if our mind is not contaminated by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, our whole perception, our whole understanding of God will be pure. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And then in verse 23, but if thine eye be evil, if your mind is evil, how can the mind be evil? The mind will be evil when we are eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. As long as we keep eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, our mind, eye, be evil. Thy whole body shall be full of darkness, which means to say, our entire understanding of God, our complete understanding of God will be nothing else but darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is the darkness? If the light, what light? The light that is in the scriptures and the light that Jesus wants to give us, but we have not accepted Jesus Christ's revelation, that light is darkness. And how great is that darkness? Can you see how important the person of Jesus Christ is for us? Extremely, extremely important, dear ones. We cannot see God. We cannot see God. And we cannot have this pure heart until and unless we allow Jesus to give us that revelation. With that, we're going to look at Ephesians chapter 5, verses 8 to 11.
Back to New King James.
Ephesians chapter 5, yeah, go ahead. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 8 to 11.
For you once were darkness. Huh?
Yes,
For
yes.
you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light.
So here, what verse 8 says, for you were once darkness, but now you are the light in who? In the person of Jesus Christ. Walk as children of the light. So the light can only come to us from no one else, because Jesus said, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Verse 9.
For the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth,
And that is agape love.
finding out what is acceptable to the Lord. And have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of those things which are done by them in secret.
So here, what is our job? What is our responsibility? What is God calling us to do? Here it is clearly stating, telling us, for it is shameful even to speak of those things which are done by them in secret. What is these things that are done that are in secret? Nothing else, dear ones. Believe me, nothing else. But how we are with the mind from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and we are doing these things. In verse 11, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. Have no fellowship with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Only have that fellowship from the person of Jesus Christ. But rather expose this evil. Expose this evil that comes from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now we are going to look at some of the thoughts in this connection from Jesus again. Jesus in Luke chapter 10, we'll see what he had to say. Verses 21 to 24. Luke chapter 10, verses 21 to 24.
In that hour Jesus rejoiced in the Spirit and said, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and prudent and revealed them to babes. Even so, Father, for it seemed good in your sight. All things have been delivered to me by my Father, and no one knows who the Son is except the Father, and who the Father is except the Son, and the one to whom the Son wills to reveal him. Then he turned to his disciples and said privately, Blessed are the eyes which see the things you see.
So here, what eye? Blessed are the eyes that see the things that you see. And what are the things that they are going to see? Jesus tells us clearly. And this is why, again, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. See what Jesus says.
For I tell you that many prophets and kings have desired to see what you see, and have not seen it, and to hear what you hear, and have not heard it.
So Jesus in verse 24 has clearly told us that no person, keep this in mind, I'm reading what he said, for I tell you that many prophets and kings have desired to see what you see, and have not seen it, and to hear what you hear, and have not heard it. That is very profound what Jesus has stated there, that he has elevated himself to the pinnacle of giving us a true revelation of God. So he says, nobody, for I tell you the truth, that many prophets and kings, who were these people in the Old Testament? They desired to see and hear and know what Jesus was proclaiming. And kings have desired to see what you see and have not seen it, and to hear what you hear and have not heard it. They didn't, until Jesus came and gave that revelation. With that in mind, we're going to look at another verse in Matthew chapter 13. Pardon me. Matthew chapter 13 and verses 14 to 17. Matthew chapter 13, verses 14 to 17.
And in them the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled, which says, Hearing you will hear and shall not understand, and seeing you will see and not perceive.
Why? Why is Jesus saying this to them? Because they are rejecting his revelation of God. Simple. That's what he's saying. Hearing you will hear and shall not understand. and seeing you will see, and you will not perceive. Go ahead.
For the hearts of this people have grown dull. Their ears are hard of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, lest they should understand with their hearts and turn, so that I should heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For assuredly I say to you that many prophets and righteous men desire to see what you see, and did not see it, and to hear what you hear, and did not hear it.
So he's telling us again, here, he's telling us exactly the same thing. That outside of the person of Jesus Christ giving us this revelation, if we reject this, then this is exactly where we are, what he's stating there. Okay, for assuredly I say to you that many prophets and righteous men desired to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it. Which means to say that they didn't have it. They didn't see it. They didn't know. But now there is no excuse for them. Jesus said there's no excuse for them, neither there is any excuse for any one of us. Because we can look back and see and look and study and see everything that Jesus taught. And it did not fall into that category. The other verse is in chapter 15, verse 14.
I'll start with 13.
Go ahead.
But he answered and said, every plant which my Father has not planted will be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind leaders of the blind. If the blind leads the blind, both will fall into a ditch.
So here, who's he talking of? The leadership. So if the leadership, let them alone. They are blind leaders of the blind. People that will take this book, the Bible, the Holy Bible, and teach things that does not conform to Jesus Christ's revelation and don't accept Jesus Christ's revelation, what ends up happening? They are blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind leads the blind, both will fall into the ditch. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And none of us, no human being, can experience that joy, that happiness, that blessedness outside of the person of Jesus Christ. With this, we will close. Well, let's look at John chapter 9. Let's look at John chapter 9. John chapter 9. And this is very important here again to see what Jesus is saying. In John chapter 9, and we are going to look at verse 39. John chapter 9 and verse 39 to 41.
And Jesus said, for judgment I have come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may be made blind.
So here, again, what Jesus is telling, clearly, he came as a what? As a judgment in this world. And what does that mean? He also stated that the very words that I speak to you will judge you in the last days. So on Jesus Christ will fall the judgment of humanity. For judgment I have come into this world, that those who do not see may see. Those who are hungering and thirsting and wanting to know God, they will see. And that those who see will be made blind. Who are the ones that see but will be made blind? They see. They will be given the truth. But they will not accept Jesus Christ's revelation of God. What ends up happening? They'll be made blind.
Then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, are we blind also? And Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, we see, therefore your sin remains.
So there it is. once we get this understanding and this revelation from Jesus Christ, and we reject that revelation, then your sin remains. Without that understanding, without that revelation, that sin is not imputed to us. Jesus has made that very clear. And again, I cannot overemphasize the fact that when he said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And we cannot, he's not talking of visual seeing God, that we can come to know and understand God through our mind, through our heart, who he is. We cannot get that understanding outside of the person of Jesus Christ. With that, we shall look at 2 Corinthians chapter 3, 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 14 to 16 and verse 18. 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Keep this in mind now, what we stated. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
But their minds were blinded. For until this day, the same veil remains unlifted in the reading of the Old Testament, because the veil is taken away in Christ.
So, which means to say, all misunderstanding of God can never be taken away outside of the person of Jesus Christ. That blindness, that veil, that misunderstanding, that understanding of God through the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that veil is taken away in Christ.
But even to this day, when Moses is read, a veil lies on their heart. Nevertheless, when one turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away.
Verse 18, thanks.
But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as by the Spirit of the Lord.
So, by the Spirit of Jesus Christ, that veil is taken away, and we, and we behold and see the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. With that, we'll look at 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 1 to 6.
Therefore, since we have this ministry, as we have received mercy, we do not lose heart. But we have renounced the hidden things of shame, not walking in craftiness, nor handling the word of God deceitfully, but by manifestation of the truth, commending ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God. But even,
Go with verse 3.
But even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, whose minds the God of this age has blinded, who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them. For we do not preach ourselves, but Christ Jesus the Lord, and ourselves your bondservants for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who commanded light to shine out of darkness, who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ.
So here, dear ones, again, blessed are the what? Pure in heart, for they shall see God. For it is the God who commanded light to shine out of darkness, the person of Jesus Christ, who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. Outside of the face, outside of Jesus Christ, we will never have this knowledge of God, and we will never glorify God the way he should be. So once again, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.